All right, everyone.
I think we should.
Hey, hello. Okay, go ahead, Shannon.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought you were gonna. Sorry. Apologies, everybody. That was flustering. Hello, everyone. Welcome to session 2 of Queering Feminism. We're super excited to have you all here with us today, despite our technology issues, but we will overcome and we will continue, so it will be good. This week, we're going to be discussing topics of disability and gender nonconformity in feminism. So without further ado, we will get started.
So we'd like to first begin with an acknowledgement of country, and we think that doing this is really important to shift our ideas of ownership and space, to simply acknowledge whose land that we're occupying, and change the way that we think about how we take up physical space and how we can maybe do labor to the custodians of this land, the traditional ones. And so this acknowledgement of country, I'll read it out loud, is we would like to acknowledge the custodians of this land, the Kumeyaay people and their elders past and present. We acknowledge and respect their continuing resilience and culture and recognize the strength, resilience, and capacity of the Kumeyaay people and extend this respect to other Indigenous people who are present. And then I'd also like to encourage everyone here and all of us at the WRC to go beyond an acknowledgement of country, to go beyond simply acknowledging whose land that we're on, but to keep ourselves updated on current issues and struggles that the Kumeyaay people are facing, the current culture and resilience and how they're preserving that, as well as to redistribute our wealth. And wealth can refer to just monetary wealth and money, but it can also refer to labor and time and volunteering and educating other people. So here are some links if you'd like to redistribute your monetary wealth. There's a lot of links in Venmos and Cash Apps there through Kumeyaay Defense Against the Wall and Shield_Indigenous on Instagram. They have a lot of different resources and links. And then I would encourage you to keep up to date on current issues related to the land that we're on and occupying so that we can take care of it better. Those are 2 links, but if you just Google what's happening with the border wall, what is happening in San Diego, or what is happening on Kumeyaay land, and you can also set your filter so that it only shows you things current, like from the past month or from the past 2 months or from 2021. That's one really good way to keep up to date. And I would encourage us all to, if there's extra time at the end of the session, maybe to take some time to Google that.
Awesome. Before we begin our session, we also like to start with some community guidelines, just sort of things to think about and consider as we have discussion today. The first is to take care of yourself. So you come first. So you do what you need to do to feel comfortable. If that's to have your camera off, to leave the session, feel free to private message Celine or I if you need like one of us to jump out and jump into conversation with you. You are the most important. So do whatever you need to do to make yourself feel safe and comfortable. 2, respect boundaries. So what is said stays and what is learned leaves. So half of this session is educational. We're going to be talking about 3 relevant disability and gender activists. And so that is information that we want to share with you all and we want you to take out of this space and share with others. The other half is more introspective and personal, and people might share things that are personal experiences to them. And those are things that are should stay within the space and that are being shared with one another, and that should be respected. Third is to challenge assumptions. So we want to acknowledge that all knowledge is cultural and contingent on context. So we all have different experiences and come from different places, and that's what makes us all so great and unique. So please try not to assume any base experiences amongst the group. And 4, if there's anything else, feel free to drop in the chat or unmute yourself and let us know if there's anything else we can do to make this space more comfortable for you.
Cool. So if you don't mind, before we start, would everyone mind to check in? And this is optional, so if you don't feel like checking in, please don't. But we just wanted to gauge, and we can share ourselves, how does your body feel right now? And what is something that you felt like you have needed this week and received? I can go ahead and share and start first. I don't know, we didn't introduce ourselves, but we're both your co-facilitators and hosts. My name is Celine. My pronouns are she or they. I'm one of the GAs at the WRC. My body feels calm right now. Transitioning to the second question, I definitely got really anxious when my screen sharing didn't work in recording because we planned on me doing that. And I had the PowerPoint ready and all the different links at the time and all the points. And then that didn't work and my thing froze. But I received compassion and support from Shannon and all of you. So I'm actually much calmer and I'm not anxious. And so I'm like, oh, cool. I'm taking care of this program. I'm really excited to go through this presentation with you all. Oh, and if you don't want to share verbally, feel free to share out in the chat.
I can go next just to introduce myself because I realized that I didn't do that either. But my name is Shannon. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am a fellow GA at the Women's Resource Center with Celine. My body right now, I'm kind of echoing what Celine said, feels a little bit like tense, a little bit anxious. But I think that as we progress through the session today and like I start to hear from everybody, I'll feel a lot more calm. So I think I'm really looking forward to that, excited about that.
I can go next. Ooh, my body was feeling hungry, and then I just finished eating lunch, and now I'm feeling a lot better. I don't know. I feel like I'm constantly like underestimating the amount of time that it takes to prepare and consume food, and I think I'm some sort of like superhuman who can like knock it out in a short amount of time. But I feel like something that I needed this week and received, I don't know if I knew I needed this, but I got to talk with my like great aunt, who I don't get to talk to very often. She lives in Florida. And it was really, really nice to have that connection to somebody that I don't get to talk to very much.
I can go if nobody else is in line. I'm really excited to be here. I'm an STSU alumna, so I saw this on my feed earlier on Instagram today, and I thought I'd join because I just really miss San Diego and the sun in San Diego State. I'm currently in Virginia, so there's a bit of a time difference. So my days later on and a little bit on eds, because actually right before I joined the meeting, I encountered a neighbor up the street that had fallen on his back stairs. And it was the first time I had to call social services on somebody because of my concerns. And that really put things in perspective today. But I'm glad we're here. I was really looking forward to that today. So it's really just made my whole day.
And then I think I'm last. Hi, everyone. I am feeling somehow both energized and tired right now. Like, I think the full week has just been tiring, but I do feel excited to be here, which I think is adding to that energy. Something that I feel like I needed this week and received has been sleep. Sleep is super important to me. So I think I'm getting better and better at logging off of work and then just resting and getting a full night's sleep. So that's been really nice.
Oh no, thank you all for sharing and taking the time to check in and ground to this space. Shannon, cool.
Awesome. Yes, thank you all for sharing. I love checking in with everybody at events. It like helps everybody know where everybody's at and like makes me feel more grounded to know that like we're all people going through the world and navigating the space, but that we found time to come together. So that's really exciting. So to begin the program, we want to think about the title of our work. Like, what does it mean? You see like our title on Instagram, Queering Feminism, right? Like, what does that mean? And what does it mean to queer feminism? So we want to share our definition of the word queer and the ways that we will be using it throughout the program to help the scene for topics that we're going to talk about today and in the next 2 sessions throughout the month. So most of us might be familiar with the term queer and its relationship to sexuality, right? We often hear it as the Q in LGBTQIA. Queer has a complicated and virulent past, and its reclamation in more recent years contains multiple meanings and uses. So that's why we find it important to kind of frame where we're looking at this word or coming at this word from. So for the purpose of this program, we propose using queer as a reference to identities and concepts that fall outside of our society's traditional norms. So the definition of normal in Western society is often constructed around ideas of whiteness, heterosexuality, affluence, masculinity, and physical ability, among other things. So in queering the norm and in queering feminism, by tackling issues left out of conversation, and by including the works of prevalent QT BIPOC activists like we will talk about today, we begin to form a more inclusive and understanding community, and also at the same time, kind of a political coalition. For our session today, we're going to discuss two prevalent disability and transgender activists, actually three, excuse me, sorry, and how they transgress traditional systems of appearance, bodily autonomy, and justice. Some questions to consider as we begin the session and begin dismantling ideas of normativity and building relationships between our bodies and our society. These are just questions that I'm going to pose now. They don't require an answer. They're just sort of to get the wheels turning. Why is talking about disability and gender expansiveness necessary in feminism? How is our access to certain protections and rights tied to our identities as masculine or feminine or somewhere in between? What about our identities related to ability status? How are our personal perceptions of ourselves and our abilities inherently political? So like I said, we don't have to answer those. They're just kind of grounding and framing questions that we hope to provide food for thought and a space for you all to process and consider and think.
Cool. So this week we'll be going over some of the work, political activism, and philosophies of Alice Wong, Mia Mingus, and Alok Vaid-Menon. Maybe some of these are familiar, maybe they're not, but we'll take you through a brief overview. So I wanted to highlight a couple quotes. Oh, go ahead, Shannon.
No, you're good. Thank you. But as Celine said, we're just going to highlight a couple quotes before we get into each of the activists on a little bit of a deeper level. These are two quotes from Alok's book, Beyond the Gender Binary, that just speak to me and I think are super important and relevant to the conversations and questions we're posing today. So I'll read them out. The first one says, some gender non-conforming people are non-binary and some are men and women. It depends on each person's experience. Two people can look similar and be completely different genders. Gender is not what people look like to other people. It is what we know ourselves to be. No one else should be able to tell you who you are. That's for you to decide. And the second one is gender nonconforming people face considerable distress, not because we have a disorder, but because of stigma and discrimination. There is nothing wrong with us. What is wrong is a world that punishes us for not being normatively masculine or feminine.
And two quotes from Alice Wong, who we'd like to highlight, and we'll give you an introduction of them afterwards, are disabled people have always existed, whether the word disability is used or not. Disability is not a monolith, nor is it a clear-cut binary of disabled and non-disabled. Disability is mutable and ever-evolving. Disability is both apparent and non-apparent. Disability is pain, struggle, abundance, and joy. Disability is socio-political, cultural, and biological. Being visible and claiming a disabled identity brings risk as much as it brings pride. Collectively, through our stories and our connections and our actions, disabled people will continue to confront and transform the status quo. It's who we are. And then the second quote is, people ask me, have you tried yoga, kombucha, this special water? And I don't have the energy to explain that yes, I've tried them. I've tried crystal and healing drum circles and prayer and everything. What I want to try is acceptance. I want to see what happens if I can simply accept myself for who I am, battered, broken, hoping for relief, still enduring somehow. I will still take a cure if it's presented to me, but I am so tired of trying to bargain with the universe for some kind of cure. The price is simply too high to live chasing cures, because in doing so, I'm missing living my life. I know only that in chasing to achieve the person I once was, I will miss the person I have become. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about Alice Wong. They're the founder of Disability Visibility, which is an online community who is dedicated to creating, sharing, and amplifying disability media and culture. Their audience too of Disability Visibility are people with disabilities themselves, to change the way that they feel about themselves, but also their ideas of what disability literature and media should be. So this whole online platform is to celebrate disability culture and community. And whereas usually if you see an initiative or a website or something related to disabilities, it's to cater to people without disabilities and to change their perceptions of people with disabilities. Alice wanted to be very intentional and was like, I want to do this work for people with disabilities, so we change our perceptions of ourselves, so we grow in our own self-love, and we create community and resilience together. And then her biggest thing is that disability must be a priority in all struggles against discrimination, of course, emphasizing accessibility in especially academia and scholarship. And so when we think about intersectionality theory or feminist theory, queer theory, etc., who is that information and what is theory for if it's not accessible? And similar to this idea, right, of when you need to raise all of us in order to bring a social movement to light. Information and our activist work must be accessible to people with disabilities. Otherwise, it's not really a revolution for everyone. Alice Wong is also the co-founder of Access as Love, which is an online resource and website that I would encourage all of us to check out if we're involved in programming. And the goal of Access as Love is to build a world where accessibility is an act of love, not treated as a burden or afterthought. So there's one cultural, social component of shifting the way that we think of accessibility as being an act of care and an act of love and something that's normal and something that we do in our personal relationships with each other. But also there's actual concrete resources and checklists and foundations for what you can do, whether you're an educator or whether you work in an organization or company, or whether you're having events like this. I like to use that checklist and go through it to make sure that I have everything checked off on Access as Love. So I'd highly encourage that website. If screen sharing were working better for Shannon and I today, we would go through that website, but it's also totally okay. That's a great resource for all of us. Access as Love was born out of the Disability Intersectionality Summit, under which Mia Mingus gave a keynote talk, Disability is Simply Another Word for Love. And we're gonna play a little clip of that. That's that link, not that link, Shannon, sorry. The Disability is Simply Another Word for Love. Yes. Thank you. If you could start at 7:50, that would be great. We're going to talk more about Mia Mingus next week when we talk about accessibility, the prison industrial complex, liberation and abolition. But Mia Mingus really works at that intersection of accessibility, radical love, care, as well as freedom and liberation from systems of policing specifically.
Can you remind me of the time one more time, Celine? So
yeah,
sorry.
7:50, you're good.
50.
Sadness, our heartbreak, and our...
Can we hear that? Okay, cool. So sorry, everyone. Thank you.
Our heartbreak and our sorrow for what we never had, for the ways that we wished our lives could have been, for the spaces that we wish could have existed, for all that is still not. I think about what it would have meant to me to be able to have access to this kind of space when I was younger, or to even just know that this existed when I was younger, and how transformative that would have been in my life. I wish that someone had been there to talk about disability in a complex and nuanced way, to be able to hold what we now call disability justice, and whatever it gets called in the future. I'm really excited for all the people that are taking disability justice and just taking it and evolving it and making it even more amazing and spectacular. So whatever it becomes called in the future, I wish that I had known that there was so much more out there, especially during some of my hardest times, especially when I was inside of the medical industrial complex experiencing so much violence, especially on those mornings when my blisters were still so raw from the days and weeks before, but I was still forced to put on my painful brace, a brace that I didn't need to be whole, that I didn't need to be whole, but others needed me to wear so that I could be the right kind of disabled child, right? One who they needed to be seen as trying to be as able-bodied as possible, trying to fix myself and walk and make my body be something other than it was, something other than I was, something other than I am. And because I stand here today in front of you all after all of those surgeries and after the braces and the physical therapies and all the other things, the forced healing, everything else. And I'm still just as disabled as I was then, because the cure didn't work as I knew that it wouldn't. Even when I was a child, I knew that it wasn't going to work. I knew that this was bullshit. I can curse here, right? That's fine, right? This is, well, I am. But it didn't take, even though they really, really, really tried. And I say that because I think that our stories are so powerful and magnificent. I hope that you all, everybody here in this room, will be able to share some of your story today here with each other, because I think our lives so clearly encapsulate why we so desperately need these kind of spaces. Our lives are illustrations of disability and intersectionality, and there is a wealth of knowledge there for us to learn from and use. And for so many of us, we don't tell our stories. If we don't tell our stories, who will? If we can't share our stories with each other, then who can we share them with? You know, I often think about all the things needed to hold my story, and I'm just gonna name a few because I'm not gonna make a huge laundry list here, but things like someone who understands disability and ableism, able supremacy, the medical industrial complex, someone who understands the ownership of children and the commodification of children and adoption, someone who understands ugliness and beauty and race and white supremacy, someone who understands the Caribbean, colonization, the US South, anti-Black racism, slavery, someone who understands patriarchy and misogyny, who understands rural lands, who understands queerness, queer people of color, all of these things and so much more, and who understand how all of these things intersect. Who is that person? Who are those people? How do we build more and more of these kind of folks and more of these kind of spaces to be able to hold all of our stories? Because I wonder what the things needed to hold your stories are. I wonder how many pieces of your stories weren't told because there wasn't anybody who could understand and hold them. And I wonder how many parts of all of our stories that we still have never told anybody because of this. And my story is just as much a story about Korean adoptees and Korea as it is a story about disability, as it is a story about feminism and queerness and growing up on a rural island outside of the US mainland. A part of this symposium is not only revealing the connections of different systems of oppression, trauma, and violence with disability, but also the connection of all of these things within ourselves and our lives, and refusing to cut ourselves and our stories up, refusing to tell partial stories for other people's convenience, refusing to separate our work for the comfort of others. Because this space should not be rare. This should be the norm. It should not be that we have to leave mainstream disability spaces or even alternative disability spaces to be able to be our full selves and have whole conversations about our own lives. It shouldn't be that we have to leave racial justice and people of color spaces to be able to fully name and examine how able supremacy and white supremacy work hand in hand to oppress and target disabled people of color and all people of color at large. It shouldn't be that we have to leave queer and feminist spaces to be able to talk about how gender oppression and ableism have deeply intertwined roots and why it is absolutely important to abolish the gender binary as it is to abolish able supremacy. It shouldn't be that we have to go to the margins of the margins of the margins of the margins. And don't get me wrong, I love living out there. There is amazing things and are amazing people out there. And it shouldn't be that that's the only place where we can be whole. It's simply another term for love. And so is solidarity, access, and access intimacy. Those are just other ways of saying love. I would argue that our work for liberation is in itself simply a practice of love, and it's one of the deepest and most profound practices of love there is. People who will take to the streets, who will take to their computers, and for who? For people they've never met before, for themselves, for generations coming after them. If that's not love, I don't know what is. And the creation of this space also is an act of love. And if we can't love each other and ourselves, then what good is any of our work to get free? What good is it if we can break down an analysis around colonization and the prison industrial complex, or how we need to end the gender binary, if we can't love each other, if we can't love ourselves? if we can't reach out to break isolation and the walls that we've put up between each other as disabled people, then we will have already lost before we've won any political battle. What good is it if we can wage amazing campaigns if we all end up hating each other in the end of it? And I see a lot of heads nodding. If we can't practice addressing the hard things between each other, then how will we ever have a fighting chance to address the hard things in this world that keep our peoples locked up and locked out? I know it's bad out there, you all. It's really, really bad. And I also know that it's going to take a long time to change it. We've been here and we will be here again. And if we don't figure out a way to treat each other well and hold on to each other, then we don't have a chance. We have to work to transform the world. But we can only do that effectively if we can work to transform ourselves and our relationships with each other at the same time. Because our work depends on us and our relationships with each other. And if anyone is worth it, it is us and the generations of disabled children and people coming after us. We have a responsibility to leave them a legacy worth fighting for. To leave them powerful stories of not only how we were able to shut down prisons and shut down ICE, but also how we were able to come through harm together for the better. How we were able to make amends with our disabled kin and heal together. One of the greatest ways that we can resist able supremacy is by loving each other.
Thank you, Shannon, for sharing that snippet of her keynotes. I would highly encourage watching the full thing if you have the chance. Mia Mingus does a lot of work on transformative justice. I know the WRC has worked with a lot of her materials before. She works with the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective. She does pod work with pod mapping, other transformative justice resources. I also want to share another resource for all of us in addition to Access is Love. Alice Wong is involved, or actually really wants to prioritize and center universal design and accessibility. This is my first time hearing about universal design, but it's basically a page that sets up principles for a curriculum or how you should present information and materials. This is best adapted perhaps for like a classroom or education setting, but can be applied to anybody who's doing any form of teaching, whether or not it's traditional like lecture PowerPoints, or it's more of like a training or an outdoor thing or a team bonding. Universal design is founded on 7 principles of making your information as accessible and digestible as possible for people of diverse backgrounds and identities. So that's one other resource. And then I want to jump to that video at the bottom of Alice Wong, if possible. And she'll talk a little bit about her book, which is an anthology of stories from disabled people. So Shannon, I think you're starting at 17, or like 17 seconds and going until 2 minutes.
Media maker and consultant. I am the founder and director of the Disability Visibility Project and online community dedicated to creating, sharing, and amplifying disability media and culture. I'm sheltering at home in San Francisco. I'm delighted to read a short excerpt from the introduction to a new anthology I edited called Disability Visibility, First Person Stories of the 21st Century, published by Vintage Books. This anthology is rooted in my love for stories by disabled people. Disability culture is everywhere, but it's not represented enough. This anthology featuring first-person stories by 37 amazing and brilliant disabled people. I invite readers to challenge what they know about disability and appreciate the richness and variation of our community. You want to check out my website for more info about the book, guide and plain language summary at Disability, Disability Project. I want to see more stories about the disabled experience in the present while honoring the past. Two, I want to see more stories about everyday people rather than the usual very important people newly mentioned at every 88th anniversary. And three, I want to increase the diversity of the mainstream representation of disability to be very white and very male. Disabled people have always existed, whether the word disability is used or not. To me, disability is not a monolith, nor is it a clear-cut binary of disabled and non-disabled. Disability is beautiful and ever-evolving. Disability is both appearance and non-appearance. Disability is pain, struggle, brilliance, abundance, and joy. Disability is socio-political, cultural, and biological. Being visible and claiming a disabled identity brings risks as much as it brings pride. As a marginalized person, I don't feel it's enough to just say, hey, pay attention to us. We're here, we exist. We're just as human as you. I want things to improve while grappling with this impulse, with the tension between subject and audience. I want to center the wisdom of disabled people and welcome others in rather than ask for permission or acknowledgement. That storytelling is an activity, a shared experience, not an object. Collectively, through our stories, our connections, and our actions, disabled people will continue to confront and transform the status quo. It's who we are.
Oh no.
Shannon, you're muted.
Sorry, I thought I was muted and then I was backwards. My bad. Yeah, thank you for sharing those videos, Celine. Those were awesome. We're going to also now talk about Alok Vaidman and shifting gears a little bit from disability to talking about gender, but also Alok's work is very much intersectional and wrapped up in similar themes and similar ideas as Alice and Mia Mingus. So just as like background information, Alok uses the pronouns they, them. They are a gender nonconforming writer, performer, and public speaker of mixed medias. So they write poetry, blog posts, they perform spoken word poetry, they've written novels, as from the quotes that I provided earlier. Their work explores themes of trauma, belonging, and the human condition, and they expand these themes to discuss the social and political implications of what it means to transgress societal norms, right? So it's not just, they're not just talking about the way that they dress, but they're also talking about the ways that dress in general and self-expression is inherently political and has political implications and what that means. Like I said, they are the author of various novels, poems, infographics, and blog posts that seek to build community, visibility, education, and begin a process of healing and self-love amongst their audience. So I have a screen cap of their Instagram page, which if you do not follow them, you absolutely should be following them. They provide content that is, like I said, focused on healing and self-love, but they also have really informational content. Like you can see a couple of infographics in that screenshot, where they provide information on things like the history of clothing, the history of biological sex, the scientific invention of racism or of race, and all these different things in a really digestible format. And I think that that's really cool that they're out there like providing that information for people on a platform that almost everybody has downloaded on their cell phones. And so I want to share some videos. I'll share one video for sure. And this is a video from about 6 years ago. If I can get the links to work. So sorry. I can, from about 5 years ago. It's just sort of like a Logue talking through their experience as a gender nonconforming person and talking about dress and self-expression and what that means to them. So I will, hopefully this will work.
So can you talk about how you feel about doing this?
I think so many narratives around trans people is that we hated ourselves when we were younger, and then now we love ourselves when we're older. And that's just totally not true for so many of us, because no matter how much we are comfortable in our bodies, the minute we go outside, we're under attack.
Can you talk about what your style says about you?
I think my fashion is its own form of armor. Our daily acts of resistance are just seen as frivolous or excessive. But I think style is actually extremely political.
Can you talk about assumptions that people have about you based on your style?
I grew up in a small town in Texas. It was like a predominantly white, evangelical, Republican, straight, cisgender type of town. And I grew up in a sort of post 9/11 queer body, even despite being told that I was a terrorist every single day, being called a faggot every single day, being called a tranny. And I think that there's this hierarchy that gets drawn between sort of flamboyant faggotry or like queer femininities or like trans femininities as being somehow inferior or less legitimate than womanhood, because we're always seen as sort of imposturing to be women. I feel like the way I understand my gender is that I am both a man and a woman, and neither a man or a woman. I'm outside of these entire categories. I think they see me and they see me as a failure. I think so many of us who grow up in the South or like in small towns think that moving to New York means we'll finally be acknowledged or like we'll finally be safe. That's a total and utter lie. And I've had to learn the really hard way. But in New York, I think because it's such a large city, there's so much anonymity. I think people don't feel empowered enough to defend people getting harassed on the streets. People will just stand and stare and watch. I've had people spit on me. I've had people call me an it. This one day, I hadn't shaved in like 2 weeks or something, and I was getting off the train, and this white man was about to enter the train, and the doors open, and he screamed, "Osama," like really, really loudly. And then I was like petrified, because my entire life I've known that when people call me a terrorist or Osama or Bin Laden or whatever, you run. You run, because no one's gonna defend you. And then he looked down and saw that I was wearing stiletto heels. So I had a beard, but then I had heels. And then he cut himself short. He said, "Stop." This really weird moment where I no longer fit his stereotype of a man of color or sort of a terrorist. So when people see me as a brown person, they automatically masculinize me too, because of this idea of the like terrorist idea. Like the other day I was using the bathroom and I walked into the women's restroom, and this older white lady came up to me and said, "What do you think you're doing, sir?" And I said, "Using the bathroom." And then she pointed to the door like very vehemently and was like, "This is the women's restroom." And then in this moment, I was so frustrated because I knew that I had to say I was a woman. Like if I walked into the men's restroom in this dress right now, there's a serious chance that I could be attacked. Like, what are you doing? And so I just said, "I am a woman." And then she looked at me and said, "Oh, you must understand why I was confused." And I think that's because when women see me, they're trying to protect this category that they belong to. And I think so much of the ways we talk about patriarchy is that it's just men doing it. And I think actually women do patriarchy every day. I was really nervous about going back to my family home in India like a couple of years ago, because I knew that my family had all found out that I was no longer like a straight man. Even though I was so scared, one of my aunts like took me aside and gave me one of her necklaces, and she didn't explain why, and she didn't say like, look, I'm validating your femininity. She just said, here you go. And all these subtle moments in my life matter a lot to me. People would come up to me and say, why do all Indian people smell bad? Why are you all like dirty? I would go home and tell my mom, like, I kept on washing my hands, but this brown wouldn't come off of me. I grew up feeling ugly because I was brown. I thought brown people could never be desirable, could never have sex. I thought we were all ugly and we all needed to be white to be beautiful. And then when I started to present more feminine, people started to call me a faggot. When we go to the club, everyone's gonna be like, oh my God, I love your outfit. But no one's gonna ask us, how are you getting home? They don't care, because I think trans feminine people only matter when we're fabulous. The very core of misogyny against trans people, or trans misogyny, is that we're always masquerading as something we're not, that we're always just put on this dress to trick someone. And so therefore we are always seen as worthy of our violence. That's why people don't stand up for us. It's kind of like, you chose to be that way, you have to take the brunt of it.
Thank you all for sitting through that video. That's one of my favorite videos to share with people, because I think it's so powerful. And I think that Alok touches on a lot of really important aspects of identity, and not just focusing on one, right? They discuss race, they discuss gender, they discuss, self-presentation, they discuss all these different things that I think all come into play when we're talking about the ways that somebody is treated and the ways that somebody is considered a person. And I think that that's just really important. So if you haven't seen the whole video, I will include the links in the follow-up email to this event, but it's a great video to spend time watching.
Cool. So we have a couple journal prompts, and Shannon and I both wanted to offer, we have a poem from Alok, or Shannon found one that we wanted to share, if we want to let that play in the background, but we also wanted to acknowledge that this is a journaling space. We wanted to save the last approximately 13 minutes for journaling. And these journal prompts are just based on the content. I know there's a lot of content. For me, at least, it feels that way. And so one of them is, how is your access to love and care? And I think it's a whole journal prompt in itself. What is love and care to you? But how is that affected by systems of oppression? I think Alok touched on that in the last video that we watched, right? Where he was like, I received the love and validation of my presentation in the club, and people will say they look fabulous and great, and they'll praise me for that. And that's one act of care that I receive, but I don't receive the care of my safety getting home. And so you can consider maybe gender-based violence and norms, inaccessibility, physical, mental, or holistic. Like, are you able to show up fully in a space? And if not, how does that impact your ability to feel cared for, right? If you're coming into somebody's home, but you don't feel welcome there, do you feel cared for? And then body presentation, of course. Prompt number 2 is similar to the themes that all three of them were talking about, of this expansivity of gender, of presentation, but also of, right, like, ableism and having a disability overall. So what does expansiveness mean to you? And what would it look like, feel like, to you? And what do you need to be your full expansive self? I really like that both Mia Mingus and Alice Wong challenge the idea of disability as a binary. I know that this conversation around gender not being a binary is much more mainstream compared to this idea of disability not being a binary either. It's not a checkbox for you. But what would it look like to live in a physical body as your full self, to live in your mental health as your full self? And what do you need in order to do that? And so there's also, Shannon shared the link to our community journaling page. It's in the chat. And if you'd like to share any of your reflections to these journal prompts, then please go ahead and share that on there. The way that dot storming works is I think you need to put in your name, but then from there you just start typing, and that's how you create a first post. It really threw me off. But yeah, we'll leave that for the last 10 minutes and we can just journal to ourselves. Shannon, do you have anything you want to add?
No, nothing particular. If people, I can play the Alok video, or I can just play some music for journaling time, or we can have quiet journaling time. I don't know how everybody feels about that. So I'm here to do anything, just let me
know. Would you all mind maybe to react with, okay, Lori's happy with either, or like a thumbs up if you want to have the poetry play in the background, and then like the heart react if you want music in the background, and then just no react if you'd rather it be silent. If you don't like using Zoom reactions, I can never find them in time, then feel free to unmute yourself. Okay, either way, Iris, I don't know if you have a preference. You can decide our preference. No? Okay.
I think it honestly just depends, and if it's not working for me, I'll just mute the screen.
Okay.
It's not a problem.
Okay, that sounds good.
Thank you.
I'll go ahead and play the Alok video then, just because I'm partly selfish and I think it's a great video that we all should see. So I'll play that.
Is called transgeneration. There's a joke in my culture that we never smile in our family photographs. You see, there is no need to smile because a photo is merely a ritual we do in public, as if family is some sort of timeline that we're creating together. Today, my grandmother is turning somewhere between 84 and 86 years old. We do not know her actual age because when she was born, her father made up a date and put it on her birth certificate so she'd be more eligible for marriage. So today, we are celebrating the fact that my grandmother was born -2 and still managed to survive. We spend hours deciding what to wear for the family photo. Grandma puts on an elegant black sari and I put on a pair of jeans and a shirt, sit up a little bit straighter as the camera flashes, take record of this moment. Sometimes I think not smiling is an act of resistance. It's a way of acknowledging and documenting the silence that glues my culture together, like, do not mention that he prayed for a son and got hurt instead. Do not mention that he can no longer tell the difference between bottle and woman, these routine acts of violence, rendered invisible, that allow family to develop on the other side. I come out to my grandmother when I'm 18. There are no photos to document this event because you must understand, in my culture, coming out as a smile smudged on a family photograph is an ocean swallowing us back. As all of our portraits tearing at the seams, it's not so much that we never speak about it, rather it's that the silence speaks for us. You see, in my culture, we learn from an early age that there is no difference between silence and violence. We inherit both from our men. My grandmother starts painting in her late 70s. When I watch her make art, I remember that this is the first time in her life that she is using her hands to make something for herself. Eventually, a pen and paper turns into a painting, and canvas turns into painting scattered across the apartment floor like a silent protest, turns into the person she sacrificed for woman, turns into what if, turns into too late. Sometimes she brings me next to her when she's naming her paintings. Today she holds up one she made from a sponge in the kitchen, says, "This is my rage." You have to understand, my culture requires an underground economy of rage, how we hate our men so much that sometimes we even hate ourselves for them, call it gender for short. You see, in my family, a child turns into a gender, turns into a marriage, turns into a mother, turns into rugrat, turns into repeat. I start wearing women's clothing when I'm 21 years old. And it's the first time in my life I can look in the mirror and not see the man I grew up terrified of staring back. Can I tell you what it means to wear an entire body as a wound? Can I show you what it means to watch a gender rewind itself? I put on a dress and turn into that photo of my grandmother in her 20s, turns into what if I tell her who I am, turns into leaving the house, turns into getting on a train, turns into a man pointing, turns into his questions, turns into his disgust, turns into him spitting on me, turns into an entire train laughing and doing nothing, turns into there's nowhere to escape in a moving train, turns into beating hard, turns into running out of the next stop, turns into running to my grandmother's apartment, turns into her telling me that I dress this way to draw attention to myself, turns into her blaming me for my own violence, turns into me sometimes believing her, turns into gifting her man for her birthday. Look how carefully we document all of the violence that has been done to us in the name of gender. Today, my grandmother calls me the biggest disappointment in her life. I recognize this not as a form of my own gender oppression, it is hers. You see, I come from a long legacy of women punished by men who continue to push the man inside of me. How good it feels for the hurt to hurt someone else, I understand.
In my culture, transgender is not just an identity. It is a tactic of survival. It is a journey to reclaim our hands from the men who steal them from us to do their work for them. It is a journey to reclaim our bodies from the genders who stole them from us. It is my grandmother's paintings. It is the first time in her life that her worth is evaluated by a man or a meal. It is me doing this for myself. It is the first time in my life that my worth is not created from all of the rage, so I refuse to call my grandmother transphobic. I will not blame her for her own violence. Instead, I will join her in not smiling in this family photograph. And there is solidarity in the silence. And there is resistance and a refusal to pretend we are both something we are not.
Awesome. Thank you all for watching that. I will now maybe play some music in our last 4 minutes. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you all for joining us. If you'd also prefer to discuss instead of journal to yourself, I know some of us process individually, some of us process both, some of us want to talk. We can do that here. We can also go into breakout room. If you have any reactions to that, Shane and I were just saying of like, we both watched this yesterday and got teary. I'm getting teary now, and I watched it yesterday and before yesterday, and it's a lot. It's also really intense. I think a lot of it's content. So if you want to debrief, or if you want to go into a breakout room and debrief, we'd also like to know your thoughts if you want to share, or just journal. Oh, Shannon, you can turn off the recording, I think.
I just realized that to myself.